Okay, Marsha, how's it
Hey,
going?
it's good. It's good. It's nice to chat with you again.
Of course, yeah. So today we have Marsha, and just the funny story about how I got introduced to Marsha was I was in On Deck podcast in the On Deck podcasting fellowship, and I put out basically a call, and I said I'm looking for people that have walked unconventional paths in life, and pretty quickly someone messaged me and recommended you, and then I went to go see your LinkedIn, and then I read it through, and I saw a pretty interesting list of things. So I saw pre-career jobs include roller skating, car hop, bartender, hotel maid, singing balloonagram, which I'm not sure what that is, delivery person, Red Cross volunteer, superstock race car pit crew member, water, water slide crowd control attendant, Chinese linguist in the U.S. Army. So when I looked at this, I thought this person is probably the personification of what I'm trying to go for with my podcast.
Got to be
So I reached
scrappy,
out to
man.
you.
Thanks. I'm glad you did. It's nice to meet you, and it's nice to see you again.
Yeah, most definitely. And so, Marsha, I would love to just hear more about you in your own words about kind of who you are, your background, what you've been thinking about lately, whatever comes to mind.
Sure, sure. I'll do a kind of a sandwich. I think you and I had talked about wanting to think thematically about what folks would listen to this podcast and want to get out of it. And I think that I'm 54 now, I'm running my own company. I didn't plan this, meaning like I didn't see when I was 14, 15, 16 that this is what I was going to do. I just knew that I was going to keep pressing forward with whatever was in front of me. And so I guess the theme that I'd love to kind of work with you on today, and we can kind of circle around it and chat about it, is helping people understand, especially in this day and age, especially as we're all starting to peek our head around the corner of the pandemic, that you don't have to have a concrete in place plan. You just kind of have to know that there's going to be times you're going to have to go with the flow. And I'm going to be happy to share with you some of the instances where I thought for sure I had it figured out and there was just nothing but a pie in the face. And I'm like, nope, okay, this is me learning that this is not the direction I get to go. And even if you plan everything out, things just happen outside your control. And the best way to attack the life that you want to lead is to recognize that sometimes the opportunities that present themselves are really the paths that you should be taking and you just don't know it. And so I can share a little bit about where I am now, and then we can maybe talk about some of the beginnings, where I came from, and then sandwich it all in between. Does that sound like a good idea?
That sounds like a plan. And yeah, I think this was one of the topics I wanted to dig into with you as well, because in our initial conversation we talked about the fact that the amount of pressure people have to achieve success as early as possible is probably the worst it's ever been. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I was even reading an article about how there are certain 20 somethings who are so stressed about getting on the Forbes 30 under 30 list and meeting the cutoff. And you just look at it and it's like, wow, like this is crazy. And
Yeah.
then they even go through, I'll send the link to you and I'll put it in the description for this video as well. But it goes into some of the things that people have tried to do to try and get on that list. And so, nothing against the list, but that's just one example of where I really feel like people have a really short view, or especially I found kind of around my age, around 20s or so, there's a really short view of what you want to do, and I think that's part of what creates a lot of this pressure to succeed as quickly as possible, climb as quickly as possible, all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I'd love to learn more about your background, how you dealt with some of this stuff when you were kind of growing up as well, and
Mm-hmm.
what your view on it is now.
Right on. Yeah, I see. I mean, it's funny because these same kids, and I'm not using that in a pejorative sense, but these same kids that want to be in the 30 under 30 are the same ones that won't pick up the phone and actually call the restaurant to make a reservation. They will only text them, or they will only do it online. And it's such a dichotomy right now how that external validation seems to be so driving for such a big chunk of the folks in their 20s. And I certainly felt that a lot when I was in my 20s too, wanting to do things that I felt were going to be externally validated. Not necessarily like in a Forbes under 30 kind of thing, but um, just to know that what I was doing was actually propelling me forward in whatever life was going to be. So I graduated high school in 1984, bazillion years ago, right? And I went up to, I'd been like a straight A student. I'd always been really squared away. And I went to San Diego State, and I partied too much. And I ended up not finishing classes, and they basically said, it's been really fun having you here, Marsha, after 2 semesters. You'll need to go now. And I'm like, damn it. So I tucked my tail between my legs, and I thought, well, they can't give you a grade for something if you don't go. So I got like a ton of incompletes, not a ton of Fs, but a ton of incompletes because I just stopped going to class. And I said, well, you have to go to class. You have to sit in the front. You have to get yourself squared away if you want to keep moving forward. And so I ended up back up at Grossmont College for a couple of semesters, and then ended up transferring to Cal State Northridge to finish my degree. But it took about 7 years. So that's kind of like, if you're talking about work streams, that was like my educational work stream. During the same time, of course, I'm having to make ends meet. And so I worked in restaurants. I was a hostess. I had 2 or 3 jobs at one time where I was kind of flitting from each job because all of them were part-time jobs, So I was a waitress. I was a singing balloonagram telegram person where basically I drive around in this, I think it was like a AMC Pacer. I don't even know what the company had, but it was the company car. And I would drive around with a giant helium tank in the back of this tiny car and blow up like 7 or 8 balloons, and then go up to the door. And we had like a T-shirt that said singing, I think it was called Balloonatics. And we'd walk up to the door and I'd sing happy birthday and hand him the balloons. And so I liked that was silly. Most people were slightly embarrassed and kind of giggly about it. Some people were downright embarrassed and wanted nothing to do with me. And I'm like, here, just take the balloons. I'll stop singing. It's okay. One time I went as a singing raisin because you could also order people to wear costumes when they brought your balloons. And so I sang the Heard It Through the Grapevine as a raisin handing you balloons. I don't know. I guess I didn't have very much, no shame apparently. But also, I think my favorite job in the whole world was working at the top of the water slide park. It's if you're in San Diego anytime, there's now a freeway there. They ended up raising the whole place, but it was one of those places where you can go and ride go-karts and play video games and do miniature golfing and stuff. And they had 3 water slides. And I just love water slides. I just think they're so delightful. They remind me of the summertime. They remind me of being with friends and just hanging out. And when I got a job there, it was just super awesome to just sit at the top of the water slide. And people had like those little tickets that they put on their wrists, and you'd go 10 times. And so I had a little punch card thing, and I'd punch their little wristbands and let them go down the water slide. And just really, even those jobs were not ultimately what I was going to be doing. It was super fun, and you learn a ton. I learned a ton about crowd control. Seriously, when people would get grumpy and start pushing and stuff, even when adults were older than me and they'd been drinking, and just having to kind of manage people, all those jobs mattered. I still say right now that much of my ability to be a consultant and understand humans comes from the times that I was being a waitress and being a cocktail waitress, because you have to provide a safe environment. You have to make sure they get what they need, but you also can't be seen as sort of subservient. And so there's a certain decorum that you take on when you are managing humans in a restaurant or an entertainment kind of atmosphere. So let's see. So during the time that I was working on my degree, I was a waitress, a cocktail waitress. I enjoyed working. That's another thing is finding your own path. So when I was at Cal State Northridge, I could not afford to take on a paid internship because I already had too many other jobs. And so I made one for myself where I could sort of designate the hours. So I just wrote a letter over to the Red Cross because, volunteer organizations always need someone to help doing something.
Yep.
And so I thought, if I write for them for their PR department, I can get credit for being an unpaid intern for the PR department, which bolstered, some real world job experience. And so I guess I just kept at it until I finished my degree in 1991. It took 7 years for me to finish my degree. I couldn't always afford to go to school, so sometimes I would take semester breaks and stuff like that. So.
Did you have a lot of anxiety around that time because your degree stretched out a little bit, and as you're graduating, you're thinking about what to do? So what was that period like for you?
I was working a lot, and so I didn't have a lot of time to actually sit and be anxious. I think that The kids nowadays have a lot more time on their hands. I mean, literally they're stringing back to jobs because they're sitting there either on their computer or on their phone. If you're literally working and you're doing a physical job that you aren't sitting in front of the computer where you can alt tab over to your TikTok or whatever, then you don't have as much time to consider that. Now, it still may hit you when you go to bed at night. The 7-year thing only bothered me because I wanted to be done, not because I felt like I was losing any inertia. Because honestly, when I got out in 1991, there was a little bit of a recession anyway, so there were no jobs. And so that's why I ended up going into the military. I have a funny story about that if you'd like to hear it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one of the things I wanted to touch on just quickly before that too is I was speaking to one of the classes at the university I went to, just because the professor wanted me to speak about some of my experiences leaving university and starting my own company and whatnot. But one of the questions that came up over and over again was people seem pretty anxious about being able to find a job that they're passionate about. This is one of the big things now, I think, where a lot of people really feel like if you're doing some kind of work, it needs to be meaningful, which I think is great. But there's also sometimes an expectation that should come really soon. So for you, as you're graduating and as you're evaluating your options and things like that, how do you think about your prospects, and what was the driving force behind how you're going to make your decisions?
I think it can be a mistake. Not always, but it can be a mistake to think that your job is supposed to be fulfilling. It is very possible for you to have a job that is satisfactory and non-combative or non-stress inducing, and have the rest of your time be where your passion comes from. So you shouldn't be in a job that you're miserable. You shouldn't be in a job that is, for lack of a better term, dead end, and we can kind of explore that later. But your job doesn't have to be like sunshine roses and all be all, because there's probably a lot of things out there that you can do to make better money and use that money to do something that you're very passionate about otherwise. So I don't know how it's going to play out. I know there are jobs that I had that I found ways to learn something. I think if you're learning something on the job, it can be fulfilling. That doesn't mean that necessarily that you're replanting all the trees in Northern California that got killed by the fires. I mean, you don't have to have so much of a direct satisfaction with the job that you're doing that there isn't ways to still find happy influences. You find people to mentor, people to learn from. You learn how business works. Sometimes being unentertained is one of the best ways to actually learn something, because you have to find a way to survive in spite of the circumstance you're in. It's a fortitude making.
That's actually super interesting. So can you dig into that? So can you just repeat what you said? Sometimes, like when you tell kids, I'm going to take away your toys, I'm going to take away your devices and stick you outside. Well, at first they kind of, go through sort of a really unattractive trembling sensation because they are now unattached to the Wi-Fi. But then you give them some sticks and you just basically say you're going to stay outside. And then once the panic of not being connected to their friends wears off, they actually find things to do that are pretty interesting, and they learn about bugs and they learn about, weeds, and they learn about other things that are just essential outside things. And I would argue the same thing happens when you are in a job that doesn't exactly appeal to everything you've ever wanted, because a job is not a fun, and I'm using that kind of as a noun. A job is a job. You are there to help that company make money. If you don't like what they do, obviously don't consider working for a company that ultimately is against your moral values or whatever. But almost every job has opportunities for you to learn and opportunities for you to give back, or they wouldn't have hired you. You're bringing something really awesome to the company. So when you get there, get a lay of the land, find out the people that you should be drafting. Get your network going. Drafting in that case meaning, like, who do you find that's got a good accelerant in front of them already? What are they doing well? How are they behaving? How are they being rewarded? What kind of things do people say about that person when they're not in the room? If that's what you also want to be, find a way to chat with that person. Buy them coffee, go for walks with them, volunteer on their projects that they're being assigned to if you're able to. Because anytime you can just pick up and learn from someone who is in that same rodeo just a touch ahead of you, then you're adding to the number of arrows in your quiver that you can take and move forward. Like I said, stuff I learned as a waitress, I'm still using today when I talk to humans and I watch their face.
I see what they're worried about and try to help them.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting because it seems like when people try to think about learning, one, the intuition, I guess, is to feel like you should do something that is totally aligned to your strengths and everything you want. And that by doing something like that, you're going to perform the best and you'll probably learn the most. And that does happen. But then on the other hand, it's also true that there's a kind of like unintuitive learning that comes from doing things that are maybe outside of your comfort zone. And those are things that people try to usually avoid as much as possible. And it seems like those moments usually happen when people stumble into something rather than necessarily choosing it.
Right.
But I've always found that to be an interesting thing too, is like none of the time is really, I mean, I guess there's certain cases where you might feel like you really were just learn nothing. But this idea of, I feel like some of the things you're getting at is regardless of the situation or the position that you're put in, if you have the mindset of wanting to learn something out of that, that's probably one of the most valuable things. Is that similar to what you're kind of getting at?
Yes, and you also vacillate depending on the company that you're with and the things that you're doing. Different size companies are going to be able to offer different types of things. I will give an example because I have been a consultant since I got out of the time my time in the Army. And there are times that the world goes quite slow when you are basically a staff augmentation type. You're basically an additional employee to the company that you've been contracted to. And sometimes things just don't move that fast. And so you have to find a way to, in spite of being bored, for lack of a better term, find a way to be successful anyway. And there were times that the way I wanted to make shit happen. I wanted to go do stuff. And sometimes you just have to kind of explore. So the bigger companies are going to have more people you can go talk to, more people you can leverage, more maybe perhaps training available, more access to like Safari books or whatever. So you have the opportunity, rather than just sitting there being bored and running into the edges of the internet, you would be able to go grab those books from Safari and read them and learn something and take yourself down to a certification center and get a new cert to, brand spanking new to put in your portfolio. Smaller companies are not going to have necessarily as much stretch money for you to do like a week-long boot camp for something, but they offer a lot of opportunities because there's just so few people for so much work to be done. So if you want to do something, they'll look at you and go try it. You got my permission. Here's an extra 40 hours to go see what you can do with that. And then kind of the world is your oyster, and you're like, okay, how do I do the research to help accomplish what I want to do? So every job that you're at, you just have to look at it and say, what about this job right here? Can I give back to them so that I can be rewarded either financially or otherwise, with opportunities? And, what can I get out of it? What can I do to add this? Now, I'm not saying resume-driven development, but more like, how do you make that a mutual win-win so that for the next 3 years that I intend to be here, I can leave with my head high, that I've done things, I've used this as a growth opportunity, and I've also made sure that my employer, who's been paying me a pretty decent wage, whatever that is also benefit from the time that I've been here.
Yeah. And how do you think the idea of trying to absorb something and trying to learn whatever you can from whatever circumstance you're put into, how do you feel like that ties into this theme that we're discussing about taking the long view?
I would say that the more experiences that you have to tap into, the more times you can say, oh, you know what, in the next, like you're building it, like Lego blocks, and you're going to be able to say, you know what, I remember talking to someone like this in the past. Could be 2 or 3 jobs ago, could be, a colleague, it could have been a boss, it could have been a subordinate to you. And every time you just keep your eyes open and do your best to see, the impact that you can have with the circumstance you're in, the more relatable you are, the more you go into future jobs. There's a lot of times I chat with folks that are under 30 and I say, it's not that you're not ready to be a senior or a principal consultant. It's that you literally have not breathed enough oxygen on the planet. You literally just need more time and place. And it's not that you are not capable. It's that literally you have no way to say, no shit, there I was, to an experience that will get a C-level person to listen to you. And it's not that they're being disrespectful. It's literally, you could have read 1 billion books. You could be very smart about what you're offering, but you can't say, I've had that experience before. And so I remember when I was at Booz Allen Hamilton, and I was there for 10 years, and I just thought, how do I climb the ladder? How do I become associate? How do I become a senior associate? How do I move up the ladder? And I thought to myself, gosh, I'd just love to be the youngest, fill in the blank. And the truth of the matter is, every day you can learn something. It's not that you necessarily have to be, if you want to get paid more, you probably have to job hop. In many instances, businesses are incentivized to keep your salary within cost of living and to relatively keep you happy and not promote you until you've already obviously demonstrated the job. If you are literally looking just to salary increase, you probably have to job hop and or complete more education or certifications. But if you just want to see how much you can get out of it in a mutually beneficial way, set up yourself for those 2 or 3 years and see how do you give as much back, but you take as much to increase your own experiential set to go forward.
Got it. Okay. And so so I cut you off, I think, before about the part about joining the military, and you mentioned you had a funny story there, and that precedes the management consulting phase. So do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yes, it does. This kind of there's 2 parts to this. So I thought that it's funny because now I'm backtracking. It was 1991 in March. I was just finishing my degree. I was going to graduate in May. And I thought I wanted to join the Los Angeles Police Department. I actually wanted to be like a PR person. I wanted to be like a community representative. But if you go into the police academy, you generally have to go and be an officer for 3 or 5 years first, and then you could segue over into the more specialty things. So right about the same time that Rodney King was happening, and I don't know if you are as cognizant of that, but there was a really bad beating by 4 police officers in 1991 of a African-American motorist. And it's kind of I think it's the first round of a lot of the similar situations that we found with George Floyd. And I wasn't paying attention to it because I was too young to understand the political and social ramifications. I was just thinking, I got to get a job. I'm getting out of college. And I really wanted to be an officer. So I went and I took the test and I did the background investigation and all the other stuff. I didn't pass the psych eval. And I was devastated. I was crushed because they said I made decisions too quickly. They said I wouldn't just let things happen. And I go, well, that's true because I'm here and I've got to fix things, right? I mean, it's my personality to keep pushing forward. I am not cop material. I did not know that at the time. I thought if I can pass the tests and I have the will and I want to, I should be able to do it. And I went home and cried for a couple of days. I appealed their decision. I told them they could not make that, how dare you not pick me? I'm an awesome candidate. It's one of those stories that really kills me because I wanted it so badly. And it was like, nah, we have the power and you don't get to be here. And I was crushed because it was where I wanted to go. So in the month or so after that I got that information, I had gone down, this is in Los Angeles, I had gone down to Glendale, a 7-Eleven in Glendale, and I stopped to get a Slurpee. And while I was walking out and drinking my Slurpee, I'm in like a little strip mall, and that's where the recruiters were. So they're always together, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard. And I ended up talking to the Marines because they were cute. I thought I'll drink my Slurpee and talk to these Marines. This is fun. That's what I was, how old was I? 24 at the time, something like that. And so I ended up talking to the Marines about a whole bunch of nothing. And because I was talking to the Marines, then all the other, recruiters prairie dogged out the front door and said, you have to talk to us too. And I'm like, fine. So I went and talked to all of them, and I didn't think anything about it. But the Army recruiter was a female that was doing a tour. She's usually a nurse, but she was doing a tour in recruiting. And she said, long story short, she talked to me and she said, I think you would be a really good candidate for Defense Language Institute, which is a place you can go to learn a second language and be a military linguist in military intelligence. And, I'm still busy licking my wounds that I would have been rejected by the police department. And so I took the material from her and I went home and I looked at it and I thought, screw it. I don't have anything to do the next 4 years. I can't get a job. The jobs were very scarce in 1991. And I thought I'll just duck in here. And I thought I'll get this language. I know there's, the GI Bill and that sort of thing. That's all I knew about the military. I had no idea. But I went ahead and took a chance. And I thought, I can do this for a few years. I went to boot camp. I went to Monterey, California for Chinese. I ended up getting stationed in Hawaii. While I was in Hawaii, I got my master's degree because I could. I mean, just keep your eyes open for the opportunities that present themselves. And sometimes you're not even looking for them. Sometimes you're not even aware that you're in the middle of being told something that is, irreversibly or uncorrectedly going to change the trajectory of your life. So what if I hadn't stopped to get the Slurpee at that location? What if I'd gone to a different place? I wouldn't be talking to you right now, because it's that sort of butterfly effect, right? And it's kind of cool. Yeah. You got to keep your eyes open for when you're being presented an opportunity. Don't bat it away. Kind of pull at it and explore and see what could come of it. It could be something that shuts you down, like police, academy, or it could be something that opens up a wide world that you never even knew was available.
Yeah. Do you feel like you did anything to stir serendipity into your life? Or do you feel like it was kind of, it would happen, you would see it, and then you would pull on that thread?
I think that those types of things happen every day, and that if you and I had the ability to be in some sort of inception, and we could see 3 and 5 layers of 3 and 5 of us's going through the world, it would be there. I'll tell you another one that happened when I was 18. Again, it's because of that I was able to do the next one, that I am here today. And I think if you pay attention a little bit more, be a little bit more aware of your world around you rather than just kind of navel gazing. This happens to everyone more often than you think, but it's rare to remember them. I was at San Diego State, and there was a little ad in the newspaper at San Diego State that said, if you would like to get a free birthstone, cut out this little ad out of the newspaper before telephones in your hip all the time. And it said, come downtown and we'll give you a free birthstone. I mean, I didn't know that the peridot was basically going to be a little tiny rock about this big and a complete POS. It was just, these are just giveaway stones so they could get you into the store. But I went down there, and as I was exiting, I was at downtown San Diego, and I was at the corner of just 2 streets. And a friend of mine went around the corner in his truck, and he saw me, and he pulled over and he goes, Marsha? And I go, hey, how's it going? I hadn't seen him for like 6 months. And it turns out he was, he's a friend that he had a lot more money than me, and he was going to Europe. And he goes, do you want to go with me? My friend that was going to go isn't going to go. And so I said, sure. Do I have to get a passport? He goes, yeah, we're leaving like in a week. I'll have to drive you up to LA to get a passport. I'm like, this is crazy. And this is the craziest thing. This is the craziest thing I've ever done, because I'm a blue collar girl that just kind of grew up in a very simple town. And I thought, this is pretty gutsy. This is pretty crazy. So the funny part about that little ad and being there is that when we went to Europe, I met a gentleman who ended up being my first husband. And he and I got married. He was from Scotland, and we moved back to the Los Angeles area, which is where I finished getting my degree. And just like, if that one little ad in the newspaper and I hadn't picked it up and gone that one day, and that truck hadn't gone around that one corner at that particular moment, or I hadn't seen him or he hadn't seen me, where would I be today? There's just so many. I'm telling you now, your listeners and yourself, think a little bit more about, and I'm not talking about the things where people go, oh, it's a good thing I wasn't here 5 minutes ago. There was a big car crash. I mean, those things, they're much less interesting from the serendipity perspective. But if you just think about the number of times that happen, probably every month, there's probably 2 or 3 things where you go, wow, if I had not reached out and chatted, or if I had not done this, or if I had done that, it would be an entirely different world that we all live in. So I'm very grateful. I think what I do to answer your question is I simply keep my eyes open, and I be aware of places where I can make a positive impact, where I can do the right thing, and where things are being presented to me where if I reach out and take them, it could be a fun ride. You never know. Some of them are not going to be a fun ride, though. That's true.
Yeah. Yeah, I think also a lot of these things, I feel like reaching out to people that you find publicly is an interesting one. So at some point, I started to just send cold emails to a lot of the different authors that I would follow, or people that I saw on YouTube videos. And especially for public figures, you assume that they're never going to respond to you because they must have so many people there. But the funny part is that because most people just rule themselves out from the beginning,
right,
there's actually not a crazy amount of people that end up going through. And so I've actually had these situations where I would read something or whatever else, even from like Wall Street Journal bestselling authors or whatever it might be, and you just reach out cold, and a lot of the time they actually respond. And you wonder why that is, and it's because it seems like it's almost an arbitrage where I had a friend who once told me cold emails are the best arbitrage opportunity that exists because there's so much that you can actually learn from them, but no one does it. And it's because of this perception that the world somehow isn't going to open up to you. But guaranteed, if you send, a certain amount, some percentage will always reach out back to you. So I think this idea of stirring serendipity into your life is one that I take really seriously, and probably all the best things in my life have never been things that I would have thought that I wanted in the first
Right.
place as well.
Yep.
And it sounds like you've had a very similar journey. And so why did you choose Chinese again for as a language?
Let's see. With that husband I was talking to you about, he and I went to San Francisco for a like a long weekend, and we happened to stay right across from the Chinese embassy. And the weekend that Tiananmen occurred, and so I'm 19 years old. I wake up and I look outside, and there's just marching and marching, and all of these signs in Chinese. I had no idea what was going on. I don't pay attention to politics when you're 19. Meh. And I was just so taken by this groundswell of people protesting. I didn't know what for. I didn't understand what for, but I grabbed a newspaper from that morning, from the little local newspapers that were talking about what was going on. And I always kept that newspaper because of the weekend that I had had and just the impact it had on me. And so when I took the Defense Language Aptitude Battery test, and it said that I qualified to basically take either Russian or Chinese, a hard language, I said, well, I definitely want Chinese, because I had seen so much passion in those people. And at Glendale Community College up in LA, I had gone to, I had a course in the afternoon that was Asian art history and then Asian history taught by the same teacher. Because of that experience I had, I wanted to understand more about Asia in general. And all of my friends growing up were always about German, Spanish, and French. That was all the classes they offered in high school. No one paid attention to Chinese at all. I mean, think about it. To have learned Chinese in 1992 was a lot more unusual than it is nowadays. And I'm pleased, because now I can wander through Target and I hear people speaking Mandarin, and it's really kind of fun, because I'm like, I forgot what that word is. But it was unusual at the time, because I was always way more interested in Asia than almost any of my friends were. And I thought, in the Pacific region, I find it very strange that people don't pay more attention to Asia than they do Europe. Europe is kind of what New Yorkers pay attention to. And then California, to me, should be a lot more paying attention to the aspects of Asia. But that's just me.
Yeah, it's pretty funny because the guest before you, his name is Daniel Nalesnik. So he was an American software engineer, but he ended up deciding to learn Mandarin, falling in love with it, and taking it to fluency. He moved to Hong Kong and had a banking job, but then quit to launch his own Chinese language learning startup called hackchinese.com.
Very cool.
And it helps people memorize words with the whole flashcard system. But one of the things that's interesting and that I'm curious to understand more about from your experience in the Army as well is now there's a lot of tools that make this a lot easier. Like there's just tools like Daniel's or Anki that help you remember words. There's tons of study material. Teachers are more widespread, and it's more of like a trendy thing now, I think. But for you, Chinese, even now, I guess, still has a reputation for being one of the most difficult languages to learn in the world. But you're seeing these protesters. You're inspired. You decide to study Mandarin. Did you give a lot of thought beforehand to how difficult it would be, or what kind of challenge you were about to enter by doing that? Especially also, from what I understand about our previous conversation, you studied pretty intensely too, right? Because it was in the Army. It was like a full-time job, effectively, to learn that.
It was.
So what was that like?
I was too dumb for it to occur to me that it might be something I was unable to do. Like, I would just of course, yeah, learn that, learn this. I learned in college. Like, I always expected growing up at some point for me to be unable to actually comprehend something I was being taught. That's probably true if I went like to OChem. Probably there's some stuff over there where I'd be like, okay, my brain is going to explode all over my left foot. I'm not learning this anymore. But for the most part, during a bachelor's degree, it's still a lot like high school is, which is memorize all the stuff and barf it back. You still have a few essays to write here and there, but ostensibly you're telling a teacher, I have absorbed what you taught me. I can tell you what you taught me to prove to you I have learned what you've taught me. Master's degree to me is where you actually start to say, all right, here's some thoughts. What do you think about it? How are you going to put them together? Where are you actually beginning to be the teacher and not the student? And that probably happens more at the master's degree level. So because my experience up through bachelor's degree had been, you can probably do what you need to, it didn't occur to me that it would be difficult to learn. I also figured that if I tested well enough that they said I could learn it, that they probably had a test that indicated as much. So it wasn't really that hard for me to learn. And I forgot the second part of your question, sorry.
Oh, what was the process like after? So you go to study at in the military. It's like 8 hours a day, right? I think
it is, and it's immersion.
And so,
it's immersion from the very beginning of the very first day at 8 o'clock in the morning. They only speak Chinese to you. It's definitely 3 Excedrin headaches by the end of the day, because you're still trying. They're talking slowly. They're trying very hard to not make your head explode. But ostensibly 4 hours in a row of nothing but Chinese. And there's only 6 people in the room. You're learning, teacher and 6 students. There's no way to hide like in the back row. You're going to get called on. The smart teachers knew to randomly ask people, because as 6 you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I'm like, I only have to answer every 5th question, right? Because you can see the pattern that's there. Smart teachers know to do it randomly, so that you have to be aware as a student to pay attention to every single question. But not every teacher worked that way. So there was a ton of listening. There was some speaking and a ton of reading. Chinese to me was really interesting. The easy part of Chinese is that there's no conjugation. I do, you do, we do, he do. There's a lot of other languages that have a lot more complex grammar structure. Obviously, what everyone says is, reading is the hard part. And no joke, it's not easy. But if you think about it, and I've always talked about this with friends that don't study Chinese, like when you see the word catastrophe, but it starts with the word cat, it doesn't mean that you instantly, when you're reading that word, think of a picture of a cat. Although cats are often involved in catastrophes, the word itself is not necessarily integral to the word catastrophe. And when you look at characters, like the one for home is a picture, is the glyph for a piggy under a roof, which means if you have food and you have a shelter, you're in home. And so the same way that I see your face and I remember your name, and I see other people's faces and I remember their name, you look at a glyph and you recognize, because of some of its parts, you go, oh, I know what that is, because I know this is the sound. This is the one that tells me how to make the sound, and this is the one that's telling me what's going on. And of course, you have to be exposed to it enough. If you're in a crowd at Disneyland someday and I go, oh, I know his face. Where did I feel like I've seen him before? That's different than when you really get to know someone and you see the characters every day, and you know what the primary, say, 2,000 characters are and how to pronounce them, because they each have names. I actually find it more logical than English. If you think about, for example, the word enough, E-N-O-U-G-H, you simply have to remember and memorize what it means, the order in which you do it, and why it's not pronounced like a donut. It's like, no, it's enough, why there's no F there. You memorize as much in English as you do in Chinese. But I found it very exciting. I loved the fact that I didn't have to switch from physics from 9 to 10 and math from 10 to 11 and social studies from 11 to 12. Your body is entirely focused on Chinese. You only hang around with other people that are studying Chinese. You eat dinner with those same people. Most of us were crazy ass A students in high school and are terribly disappointed when we get an A- or a B+. The first 4 months were nothing but vocabulary and grammar. And then once we understood the basic subject, verb, object, and sometimes you could bounce the object where you need to, after that it was simple vocab building, and you'd be learning 50 words every 2 days. So it was intense, but it was fun. And at the end, most of my class, and I'm typical of most of the people that were in my class, we were able to read and have a conversation at approximately a high school level. So you could, for example, read the paper and say, oh, there was a fire in downtown today and it took the firefighters 10 minutes to get there. No one was hurt. You could have a general conversation about some slightly conceptual things. You weren't going to have a deep conversation about the political situation between Sino-U.S. relations. But in Chinese, you could hold a pretty decent conversation with someone. And I thought that was pretty remarkable to do that over 47 weeks.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's kind of interesting about immersion is I found that one of the biggest barriers is especially when you start learning and you retranslate everything through English in order to understand it. Right. That's a huge problem. And then it's not helped if the teacher is okay with explaining things to you in English, because then you keep defaulting into it's doing that. Right. So similar to you, I have a teacher now who just speaks Chinese, and then with my language learning partners, I also just speak Chinese. And if you want to define something you don't know, you also do that in Chinese too. Either through like hand motions or using other words or something. But I had the realization at some point too that even like the word like dog in Chinese versus like go versus dog in English, even that word is not a one-to-one substitute, because in Chinese that word is used in all kinds of phrases and expressions and different things. So it's not the exact same dog you see in English. And that's the
Right.
same with any language,
Right.
where people think that you can just translate things through, but it doesn't really work like that. It's like, it's almost like a mental shift into a whole different cultural space as well.
Right.
So I found that to be one of the most interesting things, and also one of the things that caught my eye about your bio. So you studied for 4 years or 5 years
For Chinese?
as a Chinese linguist? Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. So I was studying for a year, and then I had to go to Goodfellow Air Force Base and learn sort of the military language that I would be hearing as I was translating, because that's more specific than just generalized global skills. And then
Yep.
for my assignment, I was 2 years as a translator for the Army. That is correct.
Got it. Okay. And so, what ultimately made you want to leave the military? What did you end up doing after? And how were you, if you compare the before and after of starting this kind of adventure in the military to then leaving to go start your career in consulting, I believe. What was that period of your life like, and what were you like then?
So I joined when I was 24, but I was actually 25 by the time I got to boot camp. So they called me grandma. That was cute. Um, Whatever. But I'd only ever intended to be in for 4 years. I had never thought to myself, oh, I could make this a career. Now, certainly they try to get you to understand or believe that it has as an opportunity, but I was pretty sure I wasn't going to stay in it. And frankly, my tagline is Uncle Sam and I decided to date other people. It was only 4 years. It was always what I intended it to be. I happened to be able to find a way because of my strategic location in Hawaii. I was near a university, so I could drive down there, on Tuesday and Thursday nights and not impact my Army schedule and get my master's degree while I was in. So I had achieved my purpose. I'd outlived and outwitted and outlasted the recession. And then I had my second language, which I always wanted to have, and I finished my master's degree. So when it came time to re-up, and I went in as an enlisted soldier because that was the only way to guarantee my trip to DLI. If I'd gone as an officer, it probably would have been 10 years before I would have qualified, if I would have qualified to go over as a officer studying Chinese. I had a couple of officers in my class. Majority of us were enlisted, and I didn't mind that. Even though I had my bachelor's degree, I wasn't an officer when I went through. So it was easy for me when I got out because I could make a lot more money with a master's degree and speaking Chinese, and I was now 29, than I would staying in as an E4, because E4 pay was E4 pay. And so there was no question that I was going to be getting out of the military. It wasn't it wasn't a negative decision. It was just no different than you would say, I'm going to go work for, this company for this long, and then I want to go start my own business, as an example. When I got out, I had my SCI clearance, because that's what's required in order to do that translation. And SCI clearance is kind of like a specialized clearance from from the government. And so I was able to segue that clearance to Booz Allen, because they do a lot of stuff with classified programs as well. And so I ended up actually working for Booz Allen here in San Diego as someone who was helping write all the documentation for some of the cryptologic units that were deployed in the Navy. So my brethren, I worked at a joint base, and so I was Army, but a lot of my friends were Navy. And so I was comfortable and I knew what their mission was. And so I was now helping build, I was doing the technical documentation that would support the other E3s and E4s out there that were going to be using the machines to do some of the exploitation for other Chinese linguists still in the military. So it was a really cool transition for me.
And now this is entering the third part, or I guess I guess there could be many, many chapters based on how you splice it, but
Yeah.
this kind of the management consulting, and now you're the founder and CEO of your own cybersecurity consulting firm.
I've always been in professional services because I really enjoy helping people solve their problems. I don't necessarily, and I have been in companies like I was BAE Systems is a product company, but I did not work for the product company per se. I was part of the interface with the program at SPAWAR that helped deliver that. So I was still kind of working as an interface between the clients and the company that hired me. So I've always been very comfortable working in the pro serve space. I also like the change. I like it when, for this, even for this year, I'm attached to this particular client, but the chances of doing something different in the future and learning, again, lifelong learner. I don't feel comfortable. Once I've mastered something, I get bored. And so I don't want to stay put, because then you get sort of complacent, laconic even. And I'm like, no, I got to keep learning. So I've always been driven to work in that particular direction. I kind of ran out of things to do at Booz Allen after 10 years because they always service the same teams here in San Diego. And so I popped over to BAE Systems. I was able to work some compartmentalized things for them, for clients that were on the East Coast. Stayed there for about 3 years. And then that's when I said, you know what, I got to get out of the DoD. And I did a wholesale rewrite of my resume in order to get to a place where I didn't have to use 3-letter acronyms to talk about what I'd done. I converted it all into commercial equivalents and started working for commercial companies.
And so now running your own cybersecurity firm, so you went from the singing balloonagram, Chinese Linguist in the Army, technical consultant, and now you're the founder of your own cybersecurity consulting company. Mm-hmm. So when you look back on this journey, do you just feel like it was, especially where you are now, mm-hmm. would you have ever expected any of this along the way, or what's your life like now, and how do you even think about some of your past experiences and how they affect what you're doing as a founder of this consulting company?
So in 2 weeks, I think it's May 15th, we are starting our 7th year ScaleSec. My co-founder is my husband. He is a brilliant gentleman. He's the CTO. I'm the CEO. The only reason that I'm the main founder right now is because of the service disabled veteran-owned small business status. If you own the company, you have to have that designation, and he was never in the military. So technically the company belongs to me, but truthfully it belongs to both of us. And we have 20 or so consultants that work for us. And the best part about this job, honestly, is the ability to nurture and provide opportunities for people's lives to get. I wanted this, we built this company because we wanted someplace that we had not found ourselves, Aaron and I. I wanted to go someplace where you were going to be challenged, you were going to learn a ton, but you were going to, if you were the right candidate, you were going to want it, meaning you were going to want to be expected to excel. It's kind of like when you go to your AP classes and everybody's like, "Ooh, I got a really good grade on this. Ooh, how come you got number 3 right and I didn't?" Those types of fun types of people that really enjoy self-motivation and doing better and doing awesome. The challenge is finding people before they cost so much I can't afford them. And so looking for diamonds in the rough, people that have not yet gotten certifications, people that have been really curious about cloud security, but have never been in a place where they could totally be immersed by it. Many of our consultants say they get here and they're like, wow, at my previous job, I was the only person that knew the things that I knew. And now I come here and not only does everyone know what I know, but everybody kind of has a specialty too. And they each help each other and they jump on and help when somebody needs a blog written or somebody needs some additional code written, or if somebody has a question about how did you put this together on GCP, I only know it on AWS, can you help me out? And just, it's a treasure. This is an amazing job to be able to watch awesome people develop and impact and help our clients. And I just get out of the way. It's super cool to be in a position of such, I'm graced to be able to be in such a position right now.
Yeah. So Marsha, before this interview, you sent me also an article which I want to kind of chat about a little bit.
Sure.
And the title of this article, and I'll add a link to this in the description, but
sure.
The title of this article is "Don't Chase Happiness, Recognize It." Mm-hmm. And it tells this story, which I'm familiar with. Actually, I've read it a little bit. And I won't go through the whole thing, but the essence of it is basically that there's a fisherman on a beach, and he's kind of doing his thing and enjoying the sunshine and fishing. And a businessman comes along and can't understand why he has, it's just him. He's just catching his own fish. Why don't you do this bigger and better and all this kind of stuff? And the fisherman starts asking why, like, why should I do this? Why? And the businessman says, well, so you can have more money and so you can live a more comfortable life and all this kind of stuff. And eventually, they get to the point in this conversation where at the end, the businessman proposes one more thing, and then the fisherman says, uh, you know, or the businessman says, you want to do this so you can lay on a beach and enjoy every day. And he says, well, what am I doing now? So do you want to talk a little bit about this story and kind of why
Yeah.
you sent it over, and maybe any thoughts you had on how this applies or to your life as well?
Yeah. So this is sort of poignant when I share this with you guys. When I was at Booz Allen, I just was surrounded by brilliant people, and I felt very intimidated. I thought, oh, I just got here because of my clearance, and I felt very disenfranchised, not because of them, but because of my imposter syndrome. And I had this amazing woman. Her name was Colleen Conway, and she was my mentor. I don't know that she necessarily knew that. She was pretty rough. I mean, she was hardcore. She had to work with a lot of men, and she put up with a lot of crap. She was probably 15 years older than me in that neighborhood, 15, 20, somewhere in there. Maybe my age now. And when I first got there, I was still bubbly and squeaky and young. And I was answering the phone one day, and she came in and she slammed the door and she goes, "You have to lower your voice an octave. You need to slow your cadence down when you speak. You are smart and you sound like an idiot. Do you have any questions?" And I'm like, "Nope." And she closed the door and I just started crying. And I thought, that is so mean. She's so mean. And of course, her delivery could have probably been better. But the truth was, she wanted people to respect me. And she said, when you giggle, when you talk fast, when you do not act like the command that you are going to be discounted. And she didn't want that for me. She saw what I was capable of doing. And I just really, after I finished crying, I really appreciated that, because no one else was going to come along and do it. They were just going to let me be and figure it out on my own. And it would have taken me a lot longer to claw to the top if I had not understood the impact of her telling me that. So sometimes messages don't always come through in a very happy manner, but you can still act on them. You can still consider that feedback and find the way to make it work for you. So she was my mentor, and she didn't know it, because now when I speak to people, I lower my voice. I talk a little more slowly. But for 10 years, until I really felt that Marsha Wilson was someone worth talking to, I'd go into a meeting and I'd take a deep breath and I'd go, "I'm calling Conway, I'm calling Conway. I'm not Marsha, I'm calling Conway." And so I'd walk in there and I'd personify her, and I'd go, "Would she act like this?" "Yes, that's the way I'm acting." Because I watched her and I go, people respect her. When she walks into the room, they know that they're not going to go, "Hey, sister, go get coffee," or "Hey, are you willing to take notes?" She's the one that's there to make it happen. And so until I was strong enough to just be me, I was calling Conway. And that mattered deeply to me because it allowed me to work through my fear. So if Marsha wasn't good enough to actually be in the meeting, but Colleen Conway was, I was her to make sure that I could be successful. And I probably did that for 10 years until that need to not have that mental security blanket wasn't there. She died of cancer when she was in her early 50s. And I remember when she sent out a message to all of us when she was leaving Booz Allen. She hadn't told many people that she had cancer. And she attached that story that we just shared, that you just shared, in her final email. And she said, "Don't miss out on just fishing." She said, "Really think about what you're doing to make sure that you're not missing out on the days that you could be already being happy already." And so that story has a real big meaning for me, because it reminds me of how her life was cut short and how she still matters so deeply to me. And so in my mind, I try very hard to find people willing to be mentored, people that are willing to learn from me. And I'm gratified and humbled when they reach out to me, because I would love for someone to say, "I met Marsha. And so when I walk into a room, I pretend to be Marsha until I feel like I'm capable of just being me." And I would love for that. I would love to know that that gift continues from Colleen to Marsha to whoever the next woman is going to be, and hopefully the next woman after that.
Do you feel like when you see younger people today that there's a difference in how easy it is for these kinds of folks to actually live each day and enjoy each day and kind of be that fisherman. Do you think there's a difference from how you see folks now versus you know when you were younger as well?
I actually like watching people nowadays put off getting married and put off having children. You kind of have two choices with kids. You can either have them super early and you're young and you take care of them and you put off your own degree and you put off your own happiness or whatever, let's say 20 years. And then off they go and they go be their own things. And then you've got your 40s and 50s to either finish your degree or, basically take care of yourself. And I have a lot of friends that had kids, in their early 20s after high school. That wasn't me. I didn't have my first kid till I was 33. So I have 3 kids. My boys are 19 and 21 now, still at home, which is fine. And then I have a little girl who's 11. And I waited a while because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And I love the fact that kids nowadays are just enjoying being. I think that's the first part of what you asked, really. You have probably some internal angst about, am I going to be late on something? But you can either have the kids early and start being yourself at 40 or 50, or you can wait and then have all your fun and sow your wild oats and do everything crazy and have your kids in your 30s if the plan works out. Or you don't have to have kids at all. But I'm pleased to see people putting off what they see are like check boxes. Like, you don't have to own a home. There are many places you can dump your money to save money, to sock your money away, that you don't have to require the tax write-offs with owning a home. I think there's a lot of goodness in the introspective, selfish time that you have in your 20s, because you will not have that selfish time in the future if you wed someone or you basically find a life partner that you want. You're always going to have to double check with somebody, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a different evolution of your life. I've told my boys, I don't really care what you study. I don't care what you do. All I ask is that when you are doing something, consider spending, 1 dime less than you make. So you will not stretch yourself. Like, you will not have champagne taste caviar dreams in a $30,000 a year job, because you will be unhappy. You will be stressed. You'll be concerned all the time about how you're going to pay bills and how you're opening a new credit card to pay off the old one. That's bad. That's a bad juju. Don't do that. But if you find a way to put 7 dudes into a 3-bedroom house and you all just kind of flop around and the bathroom is miserable, don't go in there, it's a disaster. But you find some way to, hang out and enjoy life and live within your means and just experience things. Yeah, jump on a plane, Southwest, go up to San Francisco for the day and come back that night because you got, the $49 fares. Go just experience things, because every interface, every experience that you have is truly something valuable. It's not wasted time while you're waiting to get your bachelor's degree. It's not just mark time march. Like, every day, think about being that fisherman. Even if that day is only, maybe after I chat with you, I'm going to go outside and get the weed whacker going and put on my old shoes and do some weed whacking. And but there's still something about being in the pretty sun of the afternoon, knowing that I've got the next couple of days to spend with my family. Just enjoy where you are in the moment, because you really have no idea how the economy is going to go. I mean, it's crazy right now in a positive way for many people, but it's also really bad for others. Volunteer where you can. I mean, you have plenty of time right now by not pushing yourself to hit this mark, hit this mark, hit this mark. I mean, I think about that, what you said with the Forbes 30 under 30 or whatever it is. Well, okay, so let's say you make it. That's like being the quarterback in high school and then going, hey, let's talk about that time when I was 29 and I made it, right? You're like, stop living in the past.
Do you think that it took you some time to build your identity and get a sense for who you were through these different experiences before you could sit down and really be in the moment and enjoy things and still strive to be better, but to get to a place where you could say, okay, I'm at a place where I just want to enjoy each moment. Do you feel like that came for you later, or was it something that you tried to keep in mind even as you were leaving university, or even as you were going through the Army or any of the previous jobs you had?
From all of my friends that I chat with, and mostly it's girlfriends where I have long, silly ass chats, more so than guys. The 20s is still like defining yourself. You are as lost in your teens as you are in your 20s. You're just responsible for more. But there's still so much churn going on in your brain. Which way do I go? Does this look good? Is this the haircut I should be wearing? Should I wear boat neck, or is it okay to wear? I mean, you start thinking about, how am I me? What looks good on me? What doesn't? And that comes from personification, literally of your clothes, but figuratively of jobs and things. You know the kinds of things that matter to you. You know the kind of things you do well. You're trying to find some mastery. That's your 20s. So in your 30s, you've stopped spinning. It's like playing, like that game where you put your head on the bat and you're like, so like in your 30s, you're like, okay, I think I kind of know what direction to go, and you're kind of doing like that. And that's most of your 30s. When you're in your 40s, you're like, hey, I think I actually know some shit. I'm actually kind of excited. I've mastered enough things. I've proven myself enough times. I'm like, I may not be able to do 10 things out of 10, but I can do 7 out of 10 pretty damn well. And I'm proud of that, because you figured out what you do well by that time. In your 50s, and I can talk to other people in their 50s and see what they say. In my 50s, I've decided I don't really care what people think. And it's super cool. You start to go, I know what I do well and I know what I don't. And so when you go, well, I don't really like that, I go, okay, you don't have to. I'm not going to go, well, why don't you like that? I mean, I'm worried. Don't you like me then? I mean, none of that matters. By the time you get in your 50s, you have this settling that's beautiful, that you're like, I feel confident about the decisions that I make. I try really hard on a daily basis to do 9 out of 10 things either correctly or nicely. I'm not saying I'm a saint. There's still plenty of things that sit there in the corner and go, remember when you did that one stupid thing? You can sit and think about it right now. I mean, there's still always going to be things that aren't perfect and you would like to redo because they hurt someone's feelings and when you didn't mean to, or they were just stupid mistakes that you made that were just circumstance. But moreover, if I had it to do over, I would tell people in their 20s, don't try to be someone in your 40s already. That means you're actually shorting yourself a lot of experiences that allow you to relate to others. So like if you're busy being an outlier, an outcast, you're the 30 under 30, how can you really relate to someone who's just been chugging along? You lose that empathy, you lose that empathy in order to be so special. But then you don't have the ability to go, oh God, remember that one time? Because that's where the normal curve is. The bell curve is all these things happening to everyone here. And if you're always outside that, then it could be more difficult for you to relate or lead or collaborate with people that have had more normative experiences. So there's nothing wrong with being normal or average, because it means that more and more people can relate to you, which means you can relate to them, which means you can build trust faster.
Yeah, no, it's pretty interesting. I think people have, like, the idea of being normal seems like a really bad thing to most people, or being average it's like, that's not like something to be proud of. You don't want to be that. But inevitably, even by definition, there's some average. Like there's going to be some, like there is a middle ground there. So what would you say to that for people that are afraid of being average or normal? Any thoughts on that?
I would ask them why. I would say, what are you worried about? What do you think would happen if you were? What will happen if you're not? I mean, I would ask questions with them until we really got to the root cause of usually it's fear. Most of the time it's fear of being laughed at, fear of being ostracized, fear. And it doesn't come down to money. In many instances, it doesn't come down to money. It comes down to real basic psychological tenets. Just why are you worried about that? Let's address that. And then still, if you want to go off and be a 30 under 30, by all means, do it. But do it with your eyes open, and don't do it to fill some sad hole in your heart that isn't going to be filled by that even when you get there.
Yeah. I think the other thing that makes this difficult is obviously over the last 10 years or so, it's much easier to compare against others regardless of where they are. So before you could be pretty content because you know that relative to whatever the average is and whatever your city is, you're doing fine. You're doing maybe even well. But then as soon as you start comparing globally across every city, and there's some person that is like 20 years old and is a billionaire or something, suddenly the comparison pools that you have change a lot. So I think this is also one of the things that I was thinking about that's difficult to deal with, is that change in who you compare yourself to, that I think has changed a lot over the last year or so. So this is why it touches on another topic that I'm pretty interested in, which is just how to use technology mindfully. Because I feel like if you get sucked into that, it becomes really hard to think about some of these things from a high level, and to say, okay, this is where I am now. This is what reality is really like. It's not that I need to somehow immediately prove myself against this huge number of people out there. But I feel like if you're always immersed in technology and social media, it can be difficult to pull yourself out of it. And that's all to say that I don't think social media is inherently bad in any way, but I feel like the way most folks use it probably is not the healthiest. Do you have any thoughts on that side of things in terms of technology and how you see that playing an impact in the way people view themselves?
I would say that the number I'm not doing a good job right now. Usually I can alt tab over to Google and remember, but I think I was on an airplane the last time I was watching one of the social experiment or a couple of other
Social
things.
dilemma.
Yeah, it's a social dilemma. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. When you watch that, you realize that checking your phone compulsively is basically OCD. I mean, just doing that level of double checking on who liked what and recognizing the way you're being manipulated should motivate you to try to do something else. And I think they talked a little bit about it, but I will elaborate that the nicest thing, the best thing as a human, before there was ever computers, before there was really even houses with drywall in them, the way that you connected with humans was to help someone else. And you do it because you're helping. Oh, you need help, I will help you. But the truth is the person being helped actually has less psychological benefit than you doing the helping. When you go to help someone, when you volunteer, when you make someone's life better, you actually give yourself just as much, if not more, endorphins and good feels and oxytocin and all the awesome bits than the person that you have just assisted. And finding ways to give back. If you're an introvert, you don't want to talk to somebody, then volunteer to pick up trash on the beach because you each have your own little bag. You can put your headphones in if you want to. Even that experience that is not necessarily human to human volunteering, doing those types of things really changes your perspective. It gets you out from your earbuds and it gets you out into the world and the environment that you're in. I think that more volunteer opportunities will really turn the tide. I don't know how to do that, though. I can sit here and pontificate all day, but I cannot get my boys to do it. I'm like, let's go do this. They're like, eh. And I don't make them. I just keep demonstrating by example what I think needs to be done. When you're feeling that anxious, when you're feeling that isolated, get out, find friends, go to a barbecue, listen to some music, but don't do it alone. And if you need to, go just volunteer somewhere. Go to the Humane Society. Take a bunch of cards and stamps. You don't even have to stay. You can walk into the front desk of a senior living facility and say, I bought this variety of cards. Here's a bunch of stamps and some cool new pens. Just pass these out to the people that live here and let them, write to family and friends if they want to. Those are always needed. And what that take? 10 minutes? You went to Walgreens, you got the stamps, you got the cards, you dropped them by. 20 minutes out of your day. And you'll be like, I wonder who wrote to whom. I wonder which of those people was actually sending the last card before they passed away. I mean, you think about that and you go, you have really made a difference. You have been a butterfly effect to someone else in a positive way. And that's where our heart heals. Your heart doesn't heal because you're 30 under 30. Your heart doesn't heal because now you're a YouTube influencer. Your heart doesn't heal because you've got the coolest fingernails and you're showing them how to do it and making those ducky lips at people on TikTok. You do it because you've helped someone. And when you can help someone, that is where your heart is going to fill. Don't you guys pay attention to the Grinch when his little heart measurer went ping at the end because he helped the whole town get all of their presents back instead of being a mean old Grinch and taking their Christmas trees? It's timeless.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's sometimes unintuitive is that if you're anxious about who you are or proving yourself or something like that, there's a tendency to almost go in the direction that's not most helpful, which is to compare yourself even more. You might also try and boost yourself with different types of accomplishments, which is fine, but it may not be coming from necessarily the most pure place from a motivation sense.
Right.
In contrast, it feels like when you are helping others and you actually stop thinking about yourself for a bit, that's actually what, reduces some of this anxiety, makes you feel a little bit calmer. But it's not intuitive, and I don't really see across all the resources you see on, a lot of the resources to deal with this kind of societal stuff is, spend less time on your phone or do this or do that. But in reality, I think those things are kind of like symptomatic fixes. But it does feel like things like going and helping someone out or not thinking about yourself so much because you're focused on someone else. These are the things that actually help that at a really like fundamental level.
Yeah.
But it feels like there's almost zero knowledge that's exposed to people about how to do that or why you should do that even. So I think it's interesting that you mentioned that as how you would go about thinking about how to deal with this this technology problem, because usually people will just say things like get off your phone or use it less or put it away or these kinds of things.
A parenting rule that I learned a long time ago, my sister is a preschool teacher. She said, do not speak in the negative to a child, insofar as you don't say, don't kick your brother. You say, your feet need to stay on the ground. When they're doing something, the corrective thing is to say it in a positive measure. Tell them what you want them to do. Don't say what you don't want them to do. So thinking about it in a way, get off your phone doesn't help. All right, well, my phone is there. Now what do I do? Tell them what you want them to do. Suggest something they can do with a positive intent and make it a positive, not a do not do this. Say, do that, or try this instead. Also avoid the word should, if at all possible. Should is, I'm sure you already know, should is a word that should is a shame word. Should is a word that says, oh, you didn't do that? You should have done that instead. You're like, well, shit, it's already past when I could have done that. That's not helpful at all right now. So making suggestions for future changes and making them in a positive manner. Whenever you're talking to anyone, even to yourself in the mirror, don't yell at yourself about yesterday. Just try next time to not do the same thing and it'll be better for you.
Yeah. I think one of the things that ties pretty closely to the should is productivity, kind of the emphasis on being productive all the time. Mm-hmm. So I think a very interesting YouTube niche is productivity YouTubers who are, it's all about like managing your calendar and like how to get the most out of every minute and this kind of stuff. And it feels like on some level, people, it's actually very helpful to learn those things because those things are useful in managing yourself.
Right.
But then I realize, I really do feel like in the near future, there's almost going to be this post-productivity movement that happens, which is exactly, which is okay, so you're doing all these things and you've optimized every minute, but for what? Because then at that point there's like some bigger questions. And it's interesting, this is another one of those areas where on the internet you don't find much knowledge that's easily accessible around, well, what is beyond that? What is beyond maximizing your time and doing everything you should do? And so I think these are the kinds of things where even on this podcast I'm hoping to explore more is, can you expose different types of thinking that are beyond what gets the most views? Like I know, for example, these kinds of conversations, if they're longer, are not necessarily the ones that are most likely to receive the most views because not many people will sit for an hour and a half interview. Part of the solution to that is to cut clips and segment things, which I try to do. But really part of the experiment of this whole thing is getting into some of the perspectives that are not easy to expose in like a 60-second clip because it's just not that simple. So I really appreciate you sharing your experience and touching on some of these topics because I also feel like, interestingly, in society there's much more of a separation between folks of different age groups. So if you're in your 20s or 30s, a lot of people don't have friends in their 40s or 50s that they can actually call their friends.
Right.
I have one friend who has started a series of book clubs, and although the draw isn't that it's, kind of like intergenerational, one of the key themes about every club is that you're not going to just see people in their 20s. You'll see people in their 20s, their 40s or 50s, their 70s, or even above that. And so that's also one of the things I was hoping to take is I feel like once you look at some of these things across different age groups, you can see them more in context rather than as like this subtle thing. Because you're worried about Forbes 30 under 30, and so are all your 10 other friends that are closest to you because they're all ambitious and they want to go do things as well. So anyhow, I wanted to say I really appreciate your perspective on these things and everything you kind of mentioned throughout this interview.
Of course, of course. I was chatting with, just before this call, I had a chance to catch up with my team. We meet once a week. We're all remote, so we're across the United States. And I was asking people, what are you doing this weekend? And some will say, I'm not doing anything. And I remember one of them told me that his friend said, oh, if you're not doing anything this weekend, do you want to come over and do X, Y, Z? And he goes, no, I'm not doing anything this weekend, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do nothing this weekend. I don't want to barbecue. I don't want to mow. I'm probably not even going to do my laundry. I want to do nothing this weekend. And there's a I don't know if it's an American thing, but to disvalue doing nothing. Nothing is good. Nothing is what boredom and nothing and pondering is what's actually going to make you hit 30 under 30, by the way. Because if you're constantly using every motor, every neuron to think, then there's no neurons available to go, I'll just ponder. Because it's the pondering that's going to take you to the corners that are going to provide something that's actually different. Downtime, away time, wandering through a museum, doing things you don't normally do, being in the nothing is where you're actually going to find the fodder that's going to make you more successful, overarchingly so.
Yeah, and I think it's also well documented that a lot of really interesting discoveries come when someone's mind is at rest and they're not specifically focused on something. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the challenges is, especially if you have like a super powerful computer, so your phone in your pocket all the time, you can basically go for months if you wanted to without doing that. And one of our previous guests too, so he's a Zen priest at the San Francisco Zen Center. He mentioned that he had spoken to one person or one lady who mentioned that who was trying to get better at managing her relationship with technology. And she said, okay, the place I'll start is I'll stop watching Netflix in the shower. And so what she had done was basically, it looks like, according to what Michael told me, she basically mounted some kind of like waterproof thing in the shower so she could keep watching that. So that's why I really feel like a lot of these things that we're talking about, so taking the long view on things, feeling better about yourself, exploring the wonder in the world, managing your relationship with technology. I used to think of these subjects as kind of separate and each could be their own podcast or something. But overwhelmingly, it comes down to kind of very similar things. Yeah, they're all weaved together. And so, again, not to plug too much of the future direction of this podcast, but a lot of this for me is, how do you actually bring this in a way that to people in a way that they can access easily? Mm-hmm. So this whole thing is like an experiment in touching on these topics. And so the first guest was Zen and using technology mindfully. The second one was learning Chinese and exploring that and going off the beaten path. Now we're talking about what success and the long view. So even in the first 3 episodes, it just basically covers the 3 things that I was talking about, which are the key things that I feel like are the kinds of things that I'd like to pass on in some way. So Marsha, I know we're coming up on time. So was there anything else that came to mind that you wanted to put out there or discuss a little bit more?
I guess maybe just to reiterate that you don't have to be productive every moment. You don't have to, everything that you do, I mean, your path doesn't have to be linear. I think Gary Vee is one of my favorite inspirations on the internet right now, and he's in my Instagram feed, and I love watching him say, the road to success looks like this, and sometimes it goes backwards, and sometimes it goes forward. Enjoy the roller coaster and the directions and the spins that you go, because, again, it's going to allow you to sit next to a person and go, wow, wasn't that corner crazy? And you're going to be able to relate to people by having more experiences that are not just perfect. The perfect people, the people that have always just done the same thing and they're very vanilla, they're not even that much fun to talk to. Be someone that would be really fun to talk to at the party. And the reason you have that is because you're able to go, oh God, remember that one time? And those types of experiences don't come from being highly disciplined and only doing what you're supposed to. Sometimes you have to just kind of wander off and do something different in order for that to be an experience that can be shared with others. Being average.
One thing I want to add to that as well is if people wanted a practical way to think about how to maybe take more of these kinds of twists and turns, because I do agree those are the kinds of stories where, if you said, yeah, I got into Harvard and got my MBA, that's great, but that's not exactly the kind of experience that is really fun to talk about with other people and relate to, versus some kind of random crazy thing you did. So my one that I try to bring up sometimes is I entered this Chinese singing contest after learning for about 2 months, and I had no singing ability. I also had no real Chinese ability. Probably one of the most anxiety-inducing experiences of my life. And I didn't realize it at the time, but this has helped me so many places because it gives you something to talk about in almost any kind of context. And so one of the things I try to advocate for is what I call like this idea of like strategic embarrassment. So if you're always comfortable and you're always at the top and you're always doing what you should be and you're on top of everything, you don't really have time to not take yourself seriously. Mm-hmm. And so doing things like that, it's like you know, it's not the kind of embarrassment of like, you know, you pull your pants down in the middle of a mall.
Right.
That's probably the wrong kind because you'll get the wrong kind of attention for that.
Exactly.
But if you're entering a Chinese singing contest, you know you're probably not going to do the best. You know that it's probably not going to go how you want. It's going to be embarrassing. But when you come out of that, it really changes your ideas of yourself, because since then, my probably fear of public speaking and things like that was up here. And suddenly after that, it was way down there low, because I realized I did probably the hardest thing I could imagine. Just singing, public speaking, and doing it in Chinese in a romantic duet of some sort that we choreographed. So it's like, what public speaking exercise can someone give me that's going to be worse than this, you know?
Yeah, totally. Spontaneous. Do something spontaneous that you go, sure, let's do it. That sounds fun. That will yield exactly what you're looking for. That's so awesome. The worst that can happen is that you're like, oh, I hope no one had their phones out for that. And you know they did. That's awesome.
Okay. Well, Marsha, thank you so much for coming on and sharing everything you had.
The pleasure has been all mine.
I hope you have an awesome day.
And you as too. Great to talk to you, my friend.
Thanks.
You bet. Bye-bye.